Hello, friends. Welcome to the LeggLife podcast. My name is Adam.
My name is Sherry.
Sherry Beth, what episode are we on?
19.
We are one episode away from 20.
Whoa.
This is more than I expected us to do.
Without missing.
Without missing.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think this is more than I expected us to do.
You think we do like 5 and just be like, eh.
I thought we'd hit 7 and then be like, you know what? We're good. But I'm so impressed. 19. Now, we're going to do something different, not just in this episode, but in the next few.
We have the next 5 podcasts planned.
I'm so proud of us.
Yeah.
Because we are now in the month of May, as you are listening to this. And May actually has 5 Saturdays.
Yep.
So that means you guys get 5 podcasts this month. And when I realized that it had 5 podcasts, I started to think that it would be kind of cool to do like a series or like kind of a themed month.
Yep.
And so Sherry and I started talking about, well, what would that theme be? What are things that we could talk about for several weeks? And almost instantly, we both kind of agreed and came to the same thing. Relationships.
And not just marriage or dating, but like relationships in general. Like, how do you relate to your friends? How do you relate to your coworkers? Like, just anybody you have a relationship with.
Yep. So we're going to talk about a lot of different aspects. So each week will kind of be about a different aspect of relationship. And these are things that we have either done really well or done really poorly or that have been really helpful to us. And we're starting with one of the ones, and maybe it's the one that is the most important.
Yeah.
I feel like if you don't get this one, it makes everything else more difficult.
Correct.
Sherry Beth, what are we talking about today?
Communication.
I think that communication is, oh my gosh. Communication to me, I think is one of the things that we do the very, very best.
I agree.
Yeah?
We communicate really well. And I think that it goes back to the fact that the first 7 years of our relationship was online, on phone, like only communication.
Yeah.
There was no even like facial expressions because we were old and FaceTime wasn't a thing yet. And so it was really just like emails, like AOL Instant Messenger, and like phone calls. We
got really good at just like talking and just like chatting and just communicating to each other.
Yep.
And I think that was really helpful. And I also think it was helpful that like we started that during a time when like it was just like we were just friends.
Right. Like we didn't go into the relationship wanting really anything out of it besides just a friend.
Completely. And so that was really helpful because we just got to talk about like all life stuff and normal stuff.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, like everything.
So, Sherry Beth, when communication, like we're going to talk about a lot of stuff in this podcast. Where should we start? What should we like touch on first?
I think like we kind of like whether we're good or bad at it. I think is a good place to start. Like, do we actually think that we're good at communicating, or do we just communicate a lot? Because I think those are different things.
That's completely true. And I want to ask you, in both our relationship, but as well as other relationships with friends, do you think you are a good communicator? And here's what I want to say. I want to give one point of clarification really quick. When I say a good communicator, I don't mean in the quality of your ability to like present.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I mean, like, do you communicate well with people?
Right. I think so.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Like, I think partly as like an introvert, I have a harder time reaching out to people and just like initiating communication. But I feel like if people reach out to me, I will communicate back. And so, and generally, as far as like quality of communication, like I think so. I mean, I think that most of my friendships, we like understand each other.
Yeah, I feel like with you, what you just said was really key, that you don't always necessarily initiate the conversation, but once a conversation is happening, like you're good at like engaging in that.
Yeah.
I have also seen you, and very few people will have seen this, I have seen you be with like one-on-one people during kind of hard times, and like you communicate very well. You're very present with them. You're very like good in that setting. And so I think for you, some of it is like setting and like how comfortable you are in that.
Yeah.
Now, what about for us? Do you think that like you communicate well in our relationship? Do we communicate well together?
I think we do. I think that we communicate a lot. like there's a quantity of communication, but
Yep.
I also feel like there's a quality because and we'll get into this in a little bit, but like we understand how the other person communicates, like the tone of voice, the facial expressions, like what those mean. And so like I can, more than just Adam's words, I can get the meaning behind the words and really like understand what it is he's trying to say.
Totally. I agree. I think for me, when it comes to like friendship, I think I communicate well. I think that sometimes, because I do talk a lot and I communicate a lot, I think that sometimes that can be, well, not sometimes, I know that can be overwhelming for people. I also think that it's difficult because I think that people don't really believe that, I don't know, like I try to be super encouraging and I try to be super like, you know what I mean? And I think sometimes people think that like there must be like an ulterior motive for that. And I'm like, nope, legit just how I am.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I remember back, oh gosh, this was probably a decade ago. A friend of mine who it was a guys group, and one of them was talking about like how I was just always encouraging him and how much that meant to him. He really needed to hear that, especially from like another dude, because you don't hear that a lot. And one of the other guys like spoke up and he was like, I just never knew that was real. Like I don't think I thought, and this was like not a relationship that I had for a long time. It's kind of like we just met in that group. And he was like, I was skeptical of you at first because I was like, this guy's up to something. like
he just came across as fake, or like,
I don't know that it came across as fake as much as we just live in a world where we're not used to that happening.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think for me, like I communicate a lot and some people can question that. You know? That's genuinely that I'm honest about that stuff.
Right. Yeah. I can see that.
So that's for me. And then I think exactly what you said with our relationship. I actually think that we communicate great.
I do too.
And we'll talk about why later. And it has a lot to do with things that Sherry said. Number one, we talk about everything, even the things that we know we don't agree on.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important.
Yep.
So Sherry Beth, what do we got next? What are we moving on to?
Things that help us communicate with each other.
Okay, perfect. So there are a few things that I think are really important. And the first thing I'm going to start with is something we've talked about, I think, on a podcast before. I think we've mentioned it in vlogs before. This to me is like a relationship best practice. Like if you're trying to put down 3 things that like will help you in relationships, to me, this is one of them. Believe the best about people.
Yeah.
Like unless they give you a reason not to. So there are some people that I like have proven time and time again that they are whatever.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
But for the most part, like believe the best about somebody.
Yeah. I especially like as you're getting to know them. And again, like, you know, kind of what you said, like there are some people who have just proven that they are, you know, some type of way.
Totally.
And maybe don't deserve to have the best believed about them because they have proven that they are not the best.
Yeah, and by the way, that is something we're going to talk about later on, like in another episode. That's called a healthy boundary.
Right.
That's good.
Right.
You know?
Yep. But just, you know, especially as you're getting to know people, and then like when you know people really well, I think just always believe the best of them. Like regardless of what Adam's words are to me, I know that he doesn't intend to hurt me. I know that he, you know, is wanting the best for me.
Yep.
And so regardless of what his actual words are, like what is his heart behind that? And believe that he really wants what's best for me.
Totally. And because words can be real triggers for people. Like there are phrases and things that like just set people off.
Yeah.
And one of the healthy things is just to, in that moment, like stop, take a breath and be like, okay, what do I know to be true about Sherry? Because what you just said, like really wounded me and really hurt me. And I'm like 1 second away from like raging and being pissed off. But like if I stop in that second, I'm like, okay, what do I know to be true about Sherry?
Right.
You know what I mean? A lot of times I remind myself of truth that it's like, you know what? This probably was just a misunderstanding. What she said or what I heard may not have been what was meant.
Yes, which I think leads us into the next one. Are you listening to understand or to respond?
This is so freaking important.
Right. So, like, if you are just listening to find something wrong with what the person says, or if you're not actually listening to what they're saying, you just have your response ready. I think that is unhealthy communication.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So like, I really listening to a person and the heart behind what they're saying is, I think, so important.
Yeah, to me, this is a big deal, especially when you're talking about something that you are on the opposite sides of.
Yeah.
If this is a topic that you disagree with, or maybe something that is on its way to an argument, I think it's really important to stop and be like, okay, what am I listening for? Like, because there are times that like I'll go in a conversation and I'm locked and loaded. I'm like, all right, I'm going to win this one.
I have my 6 points before she's even said a word.
Completely.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to you, waiting on you to screw up because I'm going to blast you.
Right.
Like, that's not
healthy for either one of us.
That's not healthy. That's not helpful. That's not good communication, right? And so to me, like, am I listening to understand, or am I listening to respond?
Yep.
Because when I listen to understand, I say, you know what? Like, I disagree with what Sherry said or thinks or feels about this. Like, we're on opposite sides of this, but I want to hear her out. I want to know why she thinks this, because like, if I'm in the wrong, I genuinely want to know that so that I can, number one, admit that I'm sorry. Number two, change.
Right.
Right.
And grow as a person.
Because that's the whole goal.
Right.
That we get better as people.
Yep.
And one of the ways we do that is by like understanding each other, not going into every conversation locked and loaded, ready to blow somebody up.
Right.
Yep. And go ahead.
I also think that it's important to know how the other person communicates, how they hear things, how they say things. And I think this kind of harkens back a little bit to our Enneagram podcast discussion. Adam is a 2 and I am a 5. And so we hear things differently. He has a 2 filter, I have a 5 filter. Those are different. And so when he says words, sometimes that's not how I hear them. Uh-huh. And so this kind of comes back to the best practices. What do I know to be true about Adam? What do I think his actual intent behind those words are, more than the words themselves? Because I'm going to hear them through my 5 filter, which I can't help. It's there. And then I can speak words through my 5 filter, which he's going to hear through his 2 filter. And so it's just, he's going to hear things differently than I'm saying them, and vice versa. And so I think just knowing how each other communicates, and again, this isn't just marriage, this is any relationship ever.
Totally.
You have to be able to speak to the person in a way that they will understand, or there's just going to be miscommunication.
I remember somebody one time that I worked with had one of the most self-aware comments that I ever heard in my whole life. She was somebody who, like, we all knew as a staff went from 0 to rage in like 0.5 seconds. Just like got really angry really quick. And over the course of probably 2 years or so, started to see like a real change in her. And it kind of came out in a staff meeting about like why. And she, of course, initiated this and brought this out. And she said that she realized that she was always set off by the words of other people. That somebody would say something and she would get furious or rageful, or she'd go to a dark place, or that kind of stuff. And she said, and I had what was the word she said? I had the thought that maybe that has more to do with my perception than what people around me are actually saying. Like, are the people around me really always that wrong and I'm always that right? Or, like, am I a naturally, like, cynical person? Am I a naturally pessimistic person? And maybe, like, these people actually aren't saying anything wrong. I'm just, like, perceiving it wrong and allowing myself to get so rageful. And so she, like, recognized this in herself and took steps to change that, and, like, was a 100% different person.
Right.
And I think it's really important that we are not only understand the communication, like, pathways and the communication, like, styles of other people, but also understand that of myself.
Right. How do I hear things? Like, what does my filter look like?
Yes.
And so as people are saying things to me, again, I can't change my filter. Like, that's just is part of who I am.
Yeah.
But I can change how I perceive what's being said.
That's right.
By believing the best in people.
That's right. And if I know that, like, certain things set me off, or that, like, morons in the world like make me rageful,
Right.
then one thing I can do is like put things in place, be like, hey, Adam, this is true about yourself. And so like be aware of that. And also when you find yourself getting rageful, like stop and take a breath and be like, is this you perceiving wrong thing? Or is this like really worth this?
Right, and like a little bit of a rabbit trail here. Like, is it worth the stress and the rage and the like? That person doesn't care that you're stressed and rageful
Not at
because
all.
they probably didn't mean what they like the way that you meant it or the way that you heard it. Anyway.
They're going on their life.
Right, and so like this is just hurting you. Is it worth it?
100%.
To be rageful and angry and bitter? I don't think that it is.
I don't think so either. And so, yeah, I think that that's a really, really important one. That we're seeking to understand, not just to respond. I think that's a big deal.
In talking and in listening.
Oh, completely.
Like talking to understand the other person and saying words that they will understand.
And even asking clarifying questions. And this is helpful in relationships. Like if we're having a serious talk about something and there is the potential for misunderstanding or miscommunication, to even ask, okay, what did you just hear me say?
Right.
Right. What did you hear me say? Because I can say something that I mean one way, and in my mind, the words even came out one way, and it falls on Sherry's ears completely different.
Right.
And so I need to be like, okay, what did you hear me say?
Right.
So that the next step we take, we're both understanding each other.
Yeah. And if we need to rearrange how those words are said or change words out to make the meaning more clear, we can do that.
Completely.
Yep.
Now, sometimes, Sherry, there are issues or things that you talk about or things that happen in relationships, again, romantic, friends, every relationship, where it just creates an issue. Like there's tension there. You're on the verge of an argument. Things have escalated. And some of this depends on personality style. But how do you know, and what has worked for us when it comes to how do you know when to address something in the moment or when to wait?
So specifically in our relationship, really as soon as I start to get emotional in any capacity,
Yep.
I can no longer communicate. I can no longer actually give communication or receive communication. Which, I mean, better for worse, like that's just how I am.
Yeah.
And so if I start to get emotional, the best thing that we can do is to stop talking about it and revisit when I'm less emotional.
Yep.
Because I know that anything I say will be through this overly dramatic, overly emotional place.
Yep.
Which is probably not what I'm actually meaning to say. And anything that he says to me will be through this filter of over dramatic, over emotional, and I'm going to take it personally, which is probably not what he's meaning to say. And so it's just for us, like, you are very even keeled.
Sure.
And you can pretty much always just keep like a logical head about things. And I am not that way.
Yeah, no.
And so like, if I start to get emotional, the best thing we can do is just to walk away from it. It's just to wait.
Yeah. I will say that there is, so because I do tend to be pretty even keeled, what I want to do is like, all right, let's talk about this. Let's press through this. Let's get an answer. Let's get a resolution, and like, let's move on. Right. And then let's order pizza. But once emotions, and Sherry's right, once emotions come in, there has never been one time since we've known each other where I have tried to press that after she's gotten emotional where it has ended well.
Right.
Never.
It just then escalates into a fight.
Completely. And so for me, I need to know when to pull back and be like, you know what? Like tonight, we may just be mad.
Right.
Like you may just be in the room reading and like, I need to go watch some YouTube videos.
Yep.
Right? Like that may be the best answer for tonight. The key is to not just let that go away and just be buried, but it's to come back and revisit it.
Let's revisit.
I think too often people like let things, they have an issue, they have an argument, and then it never gets addressed or resolved. And so it's like things continually get pushed aside and swept under the rug. And what I have seen happen almost without fail is eventually that blows up.
Right, because you never actually deal with any of the issues. You just kind of pretend that they go away, but they're still there. So then there's just this giant crap pile of issues that you've not dealt with, and then all of a sudden the entire mountain falls.
Completely.
And it just, like implodes. Like the relationship probably dies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you've had all of these things that have never actually been dealt with. And so that's not healthy either.
And so sometimes it is best to not deal with something in the moment, but remember to still go back and deal with it. Mm-hmm. Remember to not avoid it. Now, here's the hard part with communication. It's uncomfortable.
Yep.
And it's messy.
Yep.
And it's easier to not deal with it.
Yep.
And it's easier to sweep it under the rug, and it's easier just to move on and laugh and go away. I just have never seen, ever seen, that not come back to really, really cause more long-term harm.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it doesn't always need to be dealt with in the moment, but still have the conversation. Come back to it when both people are in a better place. Come back to it when a resolution can be made. Come back to it when you can have a conversation about it in a loving and a kind way, rather than a fighting and accusatory way.
Yep.
But come back to it.
Yes. And I think kind of on that subject, I think that it's okay if there's not a resolution.
Yeah.
I think that it's okay to have differing opinions. I don't think that you have to keep pressing a point until the other person believes the same way you do. But I also think that it's okay to have differing opinions and still respect the other person.
You can respect the differences without having judgment.
Right.
And I think that there are things that Sherry and I vehemently disagree on.
Yes.
Like very, very much disagree on.
We are on opposite sides of an issue.
Completely. And you know what? 100% fine.
Right. It doesn't have to affect our relationship. It's okay that he believes differently than me.
And you know what's really cool is that I would say in those areas, we can even talk about them.
Yeah.
You know why? We believe the best about each other.
Yeah.
Right? And like, I know that Sherry isn't just trying to like be on the opposite side to like piss me off.
Just to be contrary.
Just to be contrary. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, because I believe the best about her. And so, now here's the reality is that, do I believe the best about Sherry in every situation? No.
Right.
But like, that's the goal. That's what we try to recenter ourselves on.
Yep.
Right? That it's like, dang it, you know what? Like, that's a value we have and I need to get back to that. I got away from it. I need to get back to it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that it's important, especially in a world like today. Right. Where there are so many differing opinions and differing beliefs and people who are, who have different lifestyles than maybe you are accustomed to remember that like differences do not need to equal judgment.
Right. Yeah.
Relationship can happen when you leave judgment away.
Yeah.
Once judgment comes in, like everybody's on the defensive and it's just like guns are out and it is never a good thing.
It's never a good thing. And I think my brain is now going to over communication as well. Yeah. In this realm. When there is a disagreement, I think a lot of people then feel the need to over communicate. And they're like, oh, well, this is every single reason why I think that you are wrong.
And almost try to explain and justify it.
And, right. And so, and I don't think that, I think communication is always important, but I think that once you have stated your case and somebody still disagrees, don't ruin the relationship by continuing to try to prove your point. Yeah. I think you can just over communicate a relationship right into the ground.
Yeah. I think that too often we forget that the goal is to like win people, not win arguments. Right. Right. Like the goal is people not being right.
Right. People matters, opinions don't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so like to me, like honor people even in the way you disagree. Yep. You talked about like over communicating and that kind of stuff. So I want to talk a little bit, Sherry, about some of the practical ways that you and I communicate. Yeah. Because we do a really good job on this. We talk about things we agree on, things we disagree on. We have a lot of in-depth conversations, which is one of the reasons I actually feel like the podcast is good for us. Right. Because like we do this anyway.
We've honestly, like we sat down when we first wanted to, when we were first talking about doing a podcast, and it took us probably 5 minutes to come up with like 10 topics because they're things we've already talked about, like things that we've already discussed in depth. And so we talk a lot in depth.
Yep. But there are some things that we do that I think help. One of the things that Sherry and I do is when there is an issue, when there is tension, when there is something going on in the marriage, each of us we know that we have an open door to like start a conversation about something.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, hey, there's something that's going on, and like we need to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, and so there's that open door. Now, here's what I want to say. Sometimes I have seen people, not us, we do pretty good at this, who, this goes back to people who want to fight. And we're going to talk about the difference between fighting and arguing in the future. Yep. Sometimes, like, tensions are already high.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody comes in with like, you know what? I want to talk about this. You're a lot like your mother. And it's like, oh God, here we go. Like, you pulled the pin.
And I just feel like that's never said as like a compliment.
No, it is never said as a compliment.
Not that like mothers are terrible, but like if somebody's like, ugh, you're just like your mother.
Normally a negative.
Normally a negative thing.
And so it's like, at that point, like what you did is you pulled the pin on the grenade and you threw it.
Right.
Like, you're not looking for conversation. You're looking for relational destruction. You're trying to hurt.
Yep.
And so for me, I think that one thing that we do is we know that we each have that open door to go to each other and say, you know what, like there's something we need to talk about. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's money. Maybe it's like other stuff, whatever it is.
Maybe it's words that you said that I'm just like, that was kind of shitty. You shouldn't have said that. Like,
yeah, that's exactly right.
Right.
Like you said this and like, this is how it made me feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's also really important, is to be clear with that. This goes back to the emotional thing that Sherry talked about earlier. One thing I know about Sherry is that when she starts to get emotional, it is difficult for her to form the words she wants to say.
Like, I physically can't form the words.
That's right.
If I'm like emotional.
Yep.
I have no words that want to come out.
And so some of it is like, and I don't know how to teach this, some of this is like the situational awareness to realize, to read the room and be like, you know what? Now's not the time.
Right.
You know what I mean? This isn't the time for this conversation.
Yep.
But I love that we both have the freedom and we've both used that a number of times. Mm-hmm. And honestly, sometimes it ends great. Sometimes like, you know what? Like, totally.
Yep.
But there's sometimes where it's like, you know what? I think you're wrong. like, nope.
We're going to agree to disagree on this.
Yeah, we're going to agree to disagree because like you're being an ass.
I still love you, but
yeah, 100%. And I think that it's okay to have that kind of level of open and honest conversation.
Yep.
I feel like in most relationships, there is not a problem of over communication. The problem is normally under communication.
I think so too. Yep.
It's that the words people use are a mile wide, but an inch deep.
Yeah.
There might be a lot of surface level communication, but there's no depth of relationship. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that is, like, depth of relationship is where good communication is born.
Yep, I agree.
It's not in the abundance of words.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I think that, kind of going back to, like, being aware of how you receive information. And, this is really one of the conversations that my boss and I actually had fairly early on, where she was like, when I say these words, what do you hear? And, how do you perceive what I said? How did you read this email? Like, what did you take from this email? Which was so important to me because I felt like she truly wants to be able to communicate with me properly and not just like throw words at me that I'm going to misconstrue or like misunderstand, which will just cause tension in the workplace. Like, she really wanted to understand her employees and how they hear words and how they say words. And I just feel like it's so important.
And I think that it's even more than words, because I struggled with nonverbals for a long time.
Yeah.
And I remember a meeting at one of my old jobs, like a staff meeting, where I don't remember what we were talking, but it was clearly something I disagreed with, because we left the meeting and I didn't say a single word. And one of my coworkers was like, you didn't say anything, but your face said everything. Because like, I would just respond in such a way that everyone in the room knew how I felt, even though I didn't say a word.
Right.
And so I think it's important to like understand, like for me, I had to work on that honestly for like 2 or 3 years about my nonverbals in meetings.
What is my face saying right now?
What is my face saying right now?
Yeah.
Because like the words I would say are not kind, but sometimes the words I say with my face are not kind either.
Right.
Right. And so like, how are your nonverbals?
Yeah.
I've had to work on that.
Yeah. And I think that's something that you and I have both had to do in our relationship as well is
Yes.
because I think we both wear our emotions on our face.
Very much.
And so usually we can tell what the other person's thinking without saying any words. But also tone of voice. I think, I can say...
But also tone of voice. I'm just kidding.
But
See,
yeah,
but that, exactly,
like,
yeah.
I mean, truly, like, if you say it in an angry or an annoyed or whatever kind of tone, no matter what your words are, that's what people will hear is your tone of voice and the facial expression you have going along with those words. And so sometimes it's less the words and more like, what are you communicating outside of words?
100%. Yeah, nonverbals, to me, when we're talking about communication relationship, I think there's a lot of things that we've said that's like, I don't think we've said anything that's new, right? Like all of this is like stuff that's out there. It's stuff that we've heard, stuff that we've learned. But one of the things that I think we don't hear enough on are nonverbals.
Yeah.
And the reality is that when you're in a relationship, when you're in a friendship with somebody, like, you know them. And so I have friends that I can tell how they're doing by looking at their face.
Right.
Right? Like, I know whether you just like bullshitted me or not based on your face.
Right.
You know? And I think that that's really important. And I think nonverbals don't get enough focus in communication because I think it's super, super important.
Yep. One of the really funny things about me that my boss actually pointed out real early on, she's like, you can't lie. Like, I can say the words, but my face tells everybody else that I'm lying. And so, like, I'm a terrible liar, which is probably a good thing. But, like, that's just one of my nonverbals is, like, people know when I'm lying.
Yep.
And so, again, like, disagreeing, like, my body and my face and my tone are completely opposite of what the words I'm saying are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one quote that we came across as we were doing this that I thought kind of jumped out to both of us.
Yeah.
Because we are big, and I hope we've hit on this, we're big believers in communicating both like easy things and hard things.
Yeah.
I think that it really does take talk of both of those. And so we put a lot of our life out online, right? You guys some of you have watched hundreds of hours of our life. You've listened to podcasts. You've watched us on Instagram Live. We've shared a lot of our life with you.
Yeah.
But the reality is that there are still things that like happen in our life and things that we have discussions about and that we wrestle with that like the internet and the world will never know. And so like there are still conversations that we have that people aren't aware of. And most of those honestly aren't comfortable.
Yep.
Right? They're not easy kind of conversations.
Yep.
And so what the quote says communicate, even when it's uncomfortable or uneasy. One of the best ways to heal is simply getting everything out. If you live bitterly, you live lonely. And I think that that's really true, that for me, even though we have a great relationship and even though we communicate really well, there have been enough misunderstandings and enough arguments and enough disagreements that if I let myself, I could create enough bitterness in my heart and in my mind towards Sherry that it would drive our relationship apart and I would be alone.
Yep.
And that's just the reality of it. That if I let myself go there, if I let myself do that, I could let it ruin this relationship.
Yeah.
Right? But the reality is that for us, one of the best ways to heal is to get it out there.
Yep.
To talk about it. To dialogue about it. All the while believing the best about Sherry, her believing the best about me, and believing that like, if I tell you this thing that's really hard, or if I tell you this and like I'm concerned that you're going to leave me.
Right.
Right? That's one of the things that like a lot of us approach relationships like, if you really knew me, you'd leave me.
Yeah.
If you knew the things that really went on in my head and went on in my heart and the things I really thought about, like, would you still stick around? And when you believe the best about somebody and it's like, you know what, I can tell you something and you don't leave, that's a big deal. I will also say, when you're looking at the people to add to your life and to have to your life, look at the people who stick around through your crap.
Yep.
When you like peel back a part of your soul and you expose that to them, and what they meet you with are things like grace and friendship and acceptance and a listening ear, even if they disagree, don't get rid of those people.
Right.
Like,
right. And I would like, I know it's harder in, non like romantic relationships, but like I would say if you are surrounded by people who don't believe the best in you and who hear your words and twist them to mean something different.
Yeah.
They should maybe not be in your life.
Yeah,
and like I said, like romantic, I think relationships are a little bit easier to be like, you cannot be in my life anymore. But coworkers, like that's a little bit harder. Like you can't just get rid of your coworkers, if that's the relationship. But I think that it's always a good thing to be that safe place for other people.
Communication rarely happens when people don't feel safe or the ability to be vulnerable or real.
Right.
Well, let me take this back. The depth of communication.
Yes.
What ends up happening is surface level chatter. If I don't feel safe with you, if I don't feel welcome with you, if I don't feel comfortable with you, if I feel like there's a chance you're going to reject me, I'm not going to bare my soul to you.
Right.
I'm just going to like surface level chatter you until our relationship dies and I can move on. Right? But I think that when we're talking about real relationships, like communication and depth of communication, even when it's uncomfortable or easy, is one of the best ways to heal. Again, like the quote says, simply getting everything out, because if you live bitterly, you live lonely. I think it's so important.
I think it's so important. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And I think every relationship has to start with communication.
Yep.
And you kind of get to decide how deep that relationship goes based on what kind of communicator you are.
Well, and just like with every part of a relationship, the beginning is always this weird dance.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, of course you communicated poorly at the beginning of a relationship. I didn't know who the heck you were.
Right.
Like, I didn't know how you communicated. I didn't know how you heard me. I didn't know, like I'm learning about you. And so, of course, communication was terrible at the beginning.
Right.
And so I would say that...
Or awkward.
It's awkward. Right? That's right. It's like this fumbling dance kind of thing. And so that takes time. Good communication doesn't happen overnight. I think we've always communicated well, going back to what Sherry said, partly because of how our relationship started as friends writing letters and on phone calls.
Right.
But I will say that even though it started in a good place, I think that over the last 15 years, we have even become better communicators with each other.
Right. Yep, I agree.
Which is great.
Yeah.
So friends, there you go. There is our Relationship Saturday #1 podcast, all about communication and relationship. Want to hear from you guys. And the way we do this, say this every week, is over on our LeggLife YouTube page. There is a community tab. And what we do is we post a graphic with this week's topic, communication and relationship. And below that, you can post a comment. You can leave a thought. You can ask a question. Let us know, is there a communication style or technique or like tip that works really well for you? We want to hear from you guys on this.
Yeah.
We want to communicate well with you guys.
We want to communicate well with you. And we want to be able to kind of start a conversation with you guys. And that's kind of the best place to do it, is on that community tab. Yeah, I think it's just the best way to communicate.
Yep, I think so. And I will say it's a good example because it's still a pretty crappy way to communicate.
It's still not great, but
it's what we have, and so we're going to use it as best as we possibly can.
Yep.
So friends, thanks for listening. Over the course of the next month, each Saturday is going to be different relationship-focused podcasts, just like this one.
Yep.
Different things that have helped us, different things that we think you will find interesting. Next Saturday, I'm pretty excited about, Sherry.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we talked a lot about today in good communication is the importance in knowing both yourself, your communication style, and your friend, your partner, whoever it is, their communication style. And so what are we talking about next week, Sherry?
The love languages.
The 5 love languages. Yep. This has been really helpful for us.
Yep.
It's a personality test similar to Enneagram-ish, but it's just another way to understand the people in your life.
Right.
And I think it will be very telling about our relationship. Yep. And so we'll peel the veil back on that next Saturday. Yeah. So friends, we love you guys. Thanks for listening to episode 19.
Yay.
Amazing.
I'm so proud of us.
I'm super proud of us.
Yeah.
It is genuine. I can genuinely say I am enjoying the podcast.
19 weeks in a row.
That's pretty crazy.
Right.
That's very crazy.
Yeah.
And not only 19 weeks in a row, 19 weeks and this is the thing we haven't talked about. Through like arguably the hardest 19 weeks of your life.
Yes. Like of my life, of my 39 years, but also like definitely of our marriage.
100%. Like even
it was
like
a very difficult time.
A very difficult time, and yet we still have done 19 in a row.
Yeah.
Spectacular. Friends, we will see you next Saturday here on the LeggLife podcast.